I never planned on betraying my husband. From the outside, our life looked ordinary, maybe even enviable. Samar, my husband, was a respected IT consultant. Our apartment was modest but tasteful, perched on the fourth floor of a quiet complex shaded by old neem trees. We had been married for 5 years, the kind of marriage that looked calm from a distance but felt cold up close. It wasn't that Samar was unkind. He was polite, predictable, and consistent. But over time, those traits became walls rather than bridges. Conversations dwindled into logistics. His eyes rarely met mine unless something needed fixing or explaining. Most nights, he came home late, exhausted and barely speaking before collapsing into bed. That's when I started noticing our neighbor, Dr. Rayan Malik. He moved in 2 months ago, alone. A doctor at a nearby private hospital, Rayan was in his mid-30s, confident but never arrogant. He had that easy way of speaking, like he'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Our first interaction was trivial. I was struggling to carry groceries, and he offered help. His hands were steady, his smile warm but measured. He asked nothing of me, and yet I found myself hoping to see him again. Soon, we started running into each other more often. In the elevator. In the parking lot. At the mailbox. Each time, our conversations grew a little longer. He listened, truly listened, in a way Samar hadn't in years. He remembered small details I had carelessly mentioned, that I liked old poetry, that I hated the smell of wet paint, that I missed my mother's cooking. One evening, it rained heavily, and the power in our building went out. Samar was still at work. I stood in the corridor, watching the storm roll in through the glass window. Rayan stepped out too, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Could use some company?" he asked, handing me one. We sat on the stairs, talking for over an hour. Nothing romantic. Just 2 people easing into comfort. But something inside me shifted that night. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was full. After that, our encounters became more deliberate. A shared walk to the gate. An invitation for tea that turned into 2 hours. A conversation on the rooftop that lingered into the early morning. I told myself it was harmless. That I just needed a friend. But deep down, I knew better. There was a night Samar came home unusually early. I was in the balcony, laughing softly at something Rayan had texted. When Samar entered the room, I panicked, hiding the phone under a pillow, heart racing. He barely noticed. Just went to the bathroom, muttering about a broken traffic signal. That was the moment it all crystallized. I felt more guilt over a message than I had joy in my marriage for months. The turning point came a week later. I had been feeling unwell, headaches, restlessness, a fluttering anxiety I couldn't name. Rayan noticed immediately. "You should come by the hospital," he said. "Just for a checkup." It started with coffee. Then came excuses. A missed call. A lie about a traffic jam. A lunch that ran long. I found myself weaving stories with a smoothness that scared me. Each untruth brought a sharper edge to my days, but also a strange sense of vitality. I felt awake again. Desired. Seen. Rayan was careful, almost too careful. He never called after 9. Never texted twice if I didn't reply. He never acted familiar in public. But behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. There, he was soft-spoken and attentive, but also bold. He knew what to say, when to say it. And I, who had always been cautious, even hesitant, started needing that part of him like breath. The affair escalated quickly. Afternoons became our sanctuary. I'd slip into his apartment while Samar worked late, my heart drumming in rhythm with the ticking clock. Rayan would already have coffee waiting. Sometimes it was silence we shared, sometimes laughter. And other times, it was the weight of our secret pressing against the walls. But no matter how deep I sank, a sliver of guilt remained. It whispered when I brushed against Samar in the kitchen. It flared when he reached for my hand in bed, only for me to flinch without meaning to. He noticed, I think. But Samar wasn't the type to pry. His silence was his way of coping, with work, with fatigue, with life. Maybe even with me. Still, I started seeing shadows where there were none. One evening, while leaving Rayan's apartment, I passed our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Ghosh. She gave me a long, unreadable glance before continuing on. The next day, she smiled too brightly at Samar in the elevator. I imagined her whispering things behind closed doors, weaving her own version of my story. At the hospital, things shifted subtly, too. I visited Rayan once a week now, always under the pretense of ongoing tests. The front desk didn't question it, but the nurse, Priya, her name tag read, began to linger. Her eyes followed me down the corridor. One afternoon, she asked, "You're back again? Not feeling better yet?" There was no accusation in her voice. But something about her tone made my skin prickle. I forced a smile. Just a few follow-ups. Inside Rayan's office, I told him about it. He brushed it off with a chuckle. She's nosy. Thinks she's everyone's older sister. But later, as he walked me out, he kept glancing around, more cautious than usual. Still, I kept going back. Even when I knew I shouldn't. Especially then. I began to need his presence in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about being touched or complimented, it was the way he looked at me like I mattered. Like I was enough. But love, or whatever illusion I had wrapped myself in, had its cost. Samar became more withdrawn. His eyes lingered on me longer. Once, he asked if I was happy. I lied. Of course I am. But the words tasted hollow even as I said them. Then came the night I couldn't sleep. My phone was in my hand, Rayan's name glowing softly. Rayan's expression unsettled me. He stood behind his desk, one hand gripping the edge, the other frozen mid-motion as if I'd interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. His smile, usually effortless, now looked rehearsed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee, familiar, but suddenly sterile. "I didn't know you were coming," he repeated, quieter this time. I stepped in, cautious. "I wasn't feeling great. I thought you'd want to check." He gestured for me to sit, his movements stiff. There was no eye contact. My pulse quickened. On the corner of his desk lay a half-empty coffee mug, and next to it, a silk scarf. Pale lavender. Delicate. Definitely not mine. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize. But something in me went still. Rayan noticed my gaze. "That's a Patience," he said quickly. "She left it earlier." But he didn't offer to move it. He didn't laugh, or wave away the tension like he used to. The appointment was a blur, blood pressure, pulse, the usual questions, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. The pauses stretched longer. His fingertips didn't linger. It felt like I was speaking to a version of him that no longer remembered who I was. "You've seemed distant," I finally said, once he'd finished typing into his system. He didn't deny it. Just leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. "This isn't sustainable, Alina." The words hit harder than I expected. Not angry. Not regretful. Just final. "I never asked for promises," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "That's the problem. Neither of us did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt airless. "I need to focus on my life," he continued. "My career. You have a marriage. Whatever this was, it helped us both escape something. But it can't last." I opened my mouth, then closed it. There were 1,000 things I could have said. Accusations. Pleas. Questions. But I chose silence. Because deep down, I had always known this was borrowed time. I stood to leave. As I reached for the door, he said, "I never meant to hurt you." I turned, hand on the handle. That's the thing about betrayal, Rayan. No one ever means to. The hallway outside felt colder than before. As I walked past Nurse Priya, her gaze followed me, unreadable. I didn't care anymore. Back home, the apartment was dim. Samar sat at the dining table, sipping tea. He looked up when I entered, eyes searching mine. "You're back early," he said. I nodded, slipping off my shoes. The silence between us wasn't tense, it was resigned. He stared at me a moment longer, then asked quietly, "Is there something you want to tell me?" My breath caught. I met his gaze, steady now. "No," I said. "Nothing you don't already know." His shoulders sagged slightly, as if he'd been bracing for an answer he'd already made peace with. He nodded, looking away. We didn't argue. There were no screams, no accusations. Just the sound of a fan spinning above, indifferent.